This is Darrell presenting Apple's Develop in Swift Fundamentals curriculum, Unit 3, Lesson 2, Typecasting and Inspection. If a function returns a class that has subclasses, we may need to learn how to ask which subclass it is. In this case, we have a function getClientPet which returns an animal, but animal may be a class with subclasses, and it may be a specific animal, and we may want to find out which type of animal it is. Let's say that animal has three subclasses: dog, cat, and bird. We can use the is keyword to test if our pet is of type dog, or if it is of type cat, or if it is of type bird. Here's another example. Pets is an array of type animal. However, animal has three subclasses: dogs, cats, and birds. So for each pet in our pets array, we test it to see if the pet is the dog subclass or the cat subclass or the bird subclass, and act accordingly. Let's say the dog subclass has a method walk, where we can walk the dog. However, that method is not in the animal class. So here we have our pets array, and for each pet in pets, we test to see if the pet is a dog. And if the pet is a dog, then we attempt to walk the dog. However, this results in a compiler error, because the compiler thinks that the pet is of type animal, because the pets was an array of animal, not an array of dogs. So we need some way of telling the compiler that we know that pet is actually of type dog, so we can execute methods that are specific to the dog subclass. Pets is an array of animals, and so for each pet in pet, we're going to attempt to typecast it as the specific pet. So here we use the as keyword to try to typecast pet as a dog. We're using the question mark, which means that this will be an optional typecast. So if this pet is a dog, then it will return the pet as type dog. But if the pet is not a dog, then it will return nil. So in effect, this equal statement is returning an optional dog. We're using the if-let syntax to unwrap the optional dog, which, if successful, would result in a non-optional dog. Once we do the typecasting, we get a non-optional dog if it is successful, and execute this code. If the conditional typecast fails, then we go into the else clause and we attempt to conditionally typecast the pet as a cat. We could forcibly typecast the pet as a dog using an exclamation mark. However, in that case, if the pet was not actually a dog, then our code would crash. Now that we have a non-optional dog, we can execute methods which are specific to the dog class, such as walk. We could not walk on any arbitrary animal. We have to typecast the animal as a dog before the dog method is available to us, and the compiler will let us execute the walk method on the dog. Here's a common example of typecasting from UIKit. We have our custom view controller, which is a subclass of the generic UI view controller. We have a segue, and we are preparing to segue between one view controller and another. And our segue destination is of type UI view controller. In our case, we know, since we did the implementation, that the actual destination is second view controller. So in that case, when we're preparing for the segue, we can typecast the segue destination as a second view controller. And because we set up the segue manually, we can safely, forcibly typecast it using the exclamation mark. Although Swift is strongly typed, you can specify a non-specific type when appropriate. There are two special non-specific types. There's any, and then there's any object. Any means any data type. Any object would mean any class. And in this case, items is an array of any, and you can see we mixed an integer, we mixed a string, we mixed a double, and we put in a dog into the array of any. And if we're iterating through the array, there's very little that we can do on any element of the array until we typecast the elements of the array into a specific type, and then and only then would we be able to use these specific methods for each type. Here's our array of type any again, and we get the first item, and then we use the is keyword to perform introspection to test if first item is any particular data type. So we can test if it's an integer, we can test if it's a string, or we can have a default clause. And depending on the result, in this case, the item 0 will be an integer, then the code between this brace and this brace will be executed. Here's optional typecasting, where we're taking item 0 and we are optionally typecasting it as an integer. That would return an optional integer. If item 0 is an integer, then the optional integer will actually be the integer. If item 0 is not an integer, then it would return nil. And then we're using the if-let to syntax to unwrap the optional integer. And if the optional contains an integer, then first item will now be an integer and we can add to it. If you are using the Apple curriculum, now you can open up the casting playground and complete the exercises in the lab. The slide deck is copyrighted by Apple, and the work is licensed by Apple under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License.